everyone, and welcome to PK's webinar, Innovate Fast Without Sacrificing Security. Before we get started, I just would like to remind everyone that all of the attendees have been muted, and if you have any questions, we'll use the Q&A feature in the Zoom app and address them at the end of the presentation. If we don't get to all of the questions, we'll provide answers in writing in the follow-up email that we send to all attendees. I'm going to now hand things over to Lou Powell, partner at PK, to get things started.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, I'm a partner at PK, and here's some more information about me. I don't want to talk too much about what I do, but today I do want to tell you first a little bit about PK, and then I'll jump into our presentation. But PK, we talk about ourselves as the experience engineering company, where we go from experiences that consumers have all the way through the tech that it takes to create strong and great consumer experiences. So we like to think of us as being that single location where you can start with the dream, go to the how, and then all the way through implementation of those modern technology patterns. Our firm is made up, we're about 3,500 folks, 22 global offices, with many industries we focus in, but the primary industries, telecom, healthcare, retail, tech. We have a lot of great solutions, and we definitely have some that are considered from the Forrester perspective, as you can see here, leaders in loyalty, consumer experience. We have some thought leading things going on in AI and robotic or RPA, as well as APIs. So lots of great things going on at PK, and that's about all I got about that. So the presentation today, the way I like to think about things is, one, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So reduce risk from the beginning. So all of the things that we like to think about are, how do we do things in this world where things are moving fast and furious, so that we can shift left, start to consider what we want our outcomes to look like and our behaviors to look like and how our systems should be secured, and build a process and an environment that fosters outcomes, rather than looking at and trying to discover all of the diseases and then go out and cure them. We want to really focus on, how do we prevent them? So how do we prevent bad activity or bad outcomes by making sure that we're focusing on the right things from the beginning? So that's a little bit of the philosophy. And so when I look at this and we start looking at all of the things that, the companies that we work with are trying to achieve, and we've worked with hundreds of companies over the last several years who are working on app modernization, digital transformation, whatever terms you guys are using to create better outcomes. These are the concepts that we see recurring over and over and over that help you to achieve that modern architecture and accelerate delivery, as well as retaining security and preventing yourself from creating new risks. So these are the concepts I'd like to cover, and these are the things that you should be thinking about as you deliver these new technologies and new concepts to your company. So the first one, how do we go faster and remain secure? And the first thing I brought up is cross-functional teams, and that seems like an odd, outlier. But when you look at the ability to deliver consistency, the ability for a team to perform efficiently, having all of the people that are required, from identification of the work to be done to impact that consumer experience, to setting the backlog, to building the API or building the underlying microservice target, to going all the way through to production. When that team has the ability to line with the consumer or the business stakeholder, set the backlog and move to production, and they do that in a continuous fashion, it creates efficiencies. So there's a lot of statistics out there that talk about the efficiencies gained by performing in a DevOps fashion, and cross-functional teams being able to perform in that DevOps fashion creates those types of efficiencies. So the second thing it's going to do is going to create the ability for the team to have a clearer understanding of the products that they represent, which is going to create more efficient delivery of new features. So instead of pulling together a team to do a project, you can use an existing team to evolve a product that they're really familiar with. Therefore, they're more likely to evolve code than to look at it and say, well, I'm not quite sure what that does and I don't want to break it. So I'm going to build a net new operation that I'm not going to disrupt the existing one. So instead of getting, more technical debt because we don't have clear understanding of the existing resources and assets, we're going to evolve our assets in a very responsible fashion. And then the security considerations there are when the team stays connected with the code, they have a clearer understanding of the risks and will be more likely to evolve the code in a safe fashion. And the second aspect is your footprint. When you do things on a project by project basis, we start to see things like, the get customer resource represented 50 times across the enterprise in different ways with different consuming systems, which truly creates a much larger attack surface for bad actors to access that data. So by creating a single secure, smaller footprint, centralized resource that a single team manages, you're actually reducing your security risks as well. So one of the challenges with that cross-functional team, of course, is going to be funding them as a team, and that is the cross-functional team concern. So that's the number one. We start with cross-functional teams. The second concept is as a service. So when you think about that team, I like to think about things in chronological progression. When you think about that team and you think, well, I've got a new team and they need to log on to I want to onboard the team and I want them to understand how we create, how we are secure, how we onboard onto the gateway, or how we onboard onto our microservices, our Kubernetes environment, and participate in pipelines and all of that stuff. You need to be thinking about creating as a service across your enterprise. So if you've got two teams, this is probably not a big concern for you. But if you're like some of our customers and you've got hundreds of teams and you're onboarding new teams all the time, then this becomes critically important, where having an as a service approach to onboarding new teams and onboarding new projects, creating new pipelines, creating new microservice stub outs, that having that as a service mentality reduces friction and reduces queuing entropy, which means you've just got a bunch of things in the queue, and at some point the queue gets so backed up that things take forever. But the idea is if you can make it a self-service process that focuses on helping the team with their objectives and outcomes and measuring your success by their ease of use of your onboarding process, or your adopting a pipeline or creating a new project, then all of a sudden you start to reduce friction in the organization and accelerate and enable those teams to move fast. As a service. So instead of we've got a bunch of technology stuff that we manage and you can put in a request and we'll onboard you, we think about it as I am providing you a service and I'm going to make it a very, very pleasing service. Train to the model. So this is the next piece. So once I bring my teams and I can get them onboarded and I tell them what I need them to do and I've got them integrated into systems and GitHub repositories and all that stuff, the next thing I need to do is train to the model. So evangelizing or communicating the message. So think about how you're communicating to your teams. How are you letting new teams know what's available to them and what's expected of them? What training are you providing to ensure that they can get that training that they need? And is that training real time, or is it just in time where they can go out and click on a link that explains to them exactly what they need to do and walks them through that in an easy to digest manner? I'm a huge fan of the 90-second video. I think a bunch of 90-second videos would do the world a lot of good if we had a lot more of them. So giving people an accessible way of understanding what's expected, I think that's a gap that a lot of folks need to fill. And then communicating often. Don't do it once and assume that you've got it licked. The reality is that sometimes people aren't prepared or in a place where the message is a relevant message, and therefore it's not really heard. And then 2 months later, they need that. So communicating often so that you're solving the problem when it becomes a need is important. And also understanding that you've got new employees, you've got attrition going on in the organization, you've got growth going on in the organization, and that messaging and that training and that communication needs to be a consistent thing that you're doing so that you can bring people up to speed with how we do it here at our company. Predefined. So I'm a big fan of this. I know a lot of folks get a little bit uncomfortable when you think about telling people how to do it, but when you think about the ability to systemize things in order to remove inefficiencies, right? So I do want teams to be valued for the things that they do that are unique, like writing code and figuring out algorithms. But I don't want teams figuring out how to secure their APIs, or how to secure their target backend systems, or how to create authorization patterns, because that creates risk. So for those things, I want to create a standard and tell you, you need to adopt one of our existing standards. So predefining those and predefining things like design standards, so that if you do have multiple teams building targets or building APIs, that you can have 20, 30, 50, 100 teams building things that are following all of the same standards and feel like they were all built by the same company. And the value there is, if it is an external interface like an API, then there's a consistency for the consumer consuming across all of your APIs, that no matter what team they were built by, they've got a common look and feel, and I only have to learn how to use one and I know how to use them all. So that's a great consumer experience. And from inside the company, by adopting those common standards, I can now transition developers across my company, and they're participating in a familiar system using familiar practices. And therefore, they become really efficient and understand how things are built and organized. So a lot of value in having these predefined structures and standards, as well as delivery patterns and reference architectures. Productized. So this is another concept that when we think about productizing. So the first thing I would say about productization is products are for customers, and your consumer may not always be your company's customer. Your consumer may be another teammate inside of your company, or it may be a business partner or a vendor, or it could be an organization. Your customers can be all kinds of folks. It could be the employees through an HR channel. So when we think about productizing, we need to think about who's actually consuming, and they are my customer, and I create a product that works for them. So when we think about products, expand your thinking to include anybody who's consuming the code or the APIs that you have built. So managing single multifunctional teams is a big part of the productization story. So we started there with a cross-functional team, but it's very difficult to create a product and manage a product if you're bouncing that product from team to team. So having a single team with a product owner who understands the customer, who understands the business value, and is working with the team to identify the activities and create the backlog and set the priority of the backlog is a very important part of creating great products. And the last part of that is design thinking. When we think about building products, a lot of the challenges that we face are that we build code or we build interfaces with the systems in mind. In other words, this is a system that I manage, and it's a CRM system. So when I'm going to give you data, I'm going to give you the data based on what I do inside of my CRM system. But when I'm a consumer of that data, and you're starting to look at it and go, well, what does the consumer want to know, and what job are they trying to do? When we build products in a design thinking way, we start with the consumer and the problem they're trying to solve, and then we iterate through helping them identify the ideal solution, and then we back into the implementation, where a lot of times our starting point is the implementation, and the solution ends up being the shortest distance between what I've got and what you're asking for, which doesn't always create great experiences. And the value of products is proving out in the marketplace. Products are easier to use. You cannot get self-service consumption of APIs. You don't get great customer adoption if you do not have productized thinking that focuses on how do I make this a great product that's easy for the customer to use, that solves their problems. So there's your next consideration, which is create great products. The next concept that I like to think about is that concept of encapsulation, and this is really related to the product concept. And the idea is when you're creating APIs and you're creating experiences for customers, you want that really not to represent your system, because a lot of times you've got a system, maybe it's an e-commerce engine, or it's an ERP or a backend mainframe system that you have legacy interfaces built on top of, and you're now just forwarding them to the customers. So when you look at things like, going out and getting an appointment for your vehicle to get your oil changed, and you say, I want to create an API for that. And you look at the systems and the way that they manage that data, the way they manage it is they go out and create first they do the search for the location, then they do a search on a vehicle, then they do a search on the parts, then they do a search on the appointment type, and then they do a search on the history, and then they do a search on the available slots, and you create an appointment, and then you start filling it with all this data that you've gone and looked up. And perhaps you're just giving your customer all of these interfaces that you've got available, and then you're telling them how to use them. So you're taking all of your complexity and you're throwing it out in front of them, and then you have to handhold them while they consume it. But if you made that a simpler experience and you allowed them to store their vehicle with their logins and say, I'm just going to pass in a request with a vehicle ID with a type of maintenance I want to do, and it's going to give me back a list of available slots, and then I pick one and all the data automatically gets pushed in. Now we've created simplicity, and we've hidden all of those 19 touch points behind 2 or 3 simple to use APIs. It's that idea of encapsulation that creates great consumer experiences. It also abstracts the implementation. So it kind of hides what's going on under the covers. It hides the complexity, but it also hides the specificity of the implementation. So you really don't want your consumer, if they're a bad actor, to have a clear understanding of how your system is organized and what it is doing. So using that API interface to create abstraction is really a strong way to get value from encapsulation. So encapsulate for simplicity. It creates great user experiences, and it also obfuscates your implementation. Pre-built and pre-approved. We love the idea of when you onboard having things pre-built, pre-approved, and ready to use. So things like, let's say that I'm using OAuth, OIDC flow for authenticating a user, and that's something that we've abstracted to the gateway layer. And we're going to allow people to use that. Whenever you build an API, you can just use that method, and it automatically implements a safe, ready-to-use security mechanism. By pre-building that, you're ensuring that it's done correctly, it's secure, and it's safe. If there isn't something safe about it. You can evolve it to ensure it stays safe, and then everyone who's using it is automatically safe. And you can also ensure that that particular safety mechanism is put in place through your pipeline process now by linting and ensuring that that common component was used. So pre-building things is a great way of creating compliance, ensuring security, and allowing for consumers to get value using self-service. So that's a very valuable and important concept. The next one's automation. So in order to create efficiency, and I think this is the one thing that we do see a lot of people doing. I think most of the customers that we're working with are looking at creating project setup automation and creating pipeline automation. So those types of things where you can go into ServiceNow or you can go into Slackbot and make a request to set something up and have it work for you, or you can go check code in and it automatically does a build and moves it through your pipeline. That type of automation where you're managing the repo, you're managing linting, you're managing validation, you're providing them with mechanisms for getting these things done and ensuring safety at speed, that by using automation, you can allow consumers to move quickly, knowing that they're operating in a safe fashion. So our encouragement is wherever, this is the Unix principle, which the fact that all of those principles were created in the 70s, when you go back and read them, you would think that they were written for modern art, but were actually written a long time ago. But avoid hand hacking or writing code when you can write programs that'll take care of that. So anything you can write code because it's just a rote activity, write code, automate it, and make it easy for consumers and make it safer to use. So flexible governance, this is an important piece. So a lot of times when we work with companies, what we find is you've got a process in place, and even if you are operating in an agile type fashion or a wagile type fashion, there's typically going to be a gate in place to ensure that you aren't doing bad things. So what we like to see is, rather than having a macro process that says all things flow through this so we can ensure that we're safe, we like for there to be different processes identified by risk orientation. So identify the risk that's involved with the activity and then build governance that actually fits. So that's a big part of the program that we like to help our customers with, is risk-oriented governance, where you're looking at the right activities at the right time, and you're not slowing down activities that, even if they aren't done the way that you want them to be done, the risk is really low. So if we're building a list of our locations that's going to be published on a website, and it's not going to be used to run our operations, and it's public data, all of a sudden the risk on that is really low. So we really don't want to get in the way of that. But if we're publishing a service that allows a customer to pull their purchase history, we now have a lot of PII and PCI type data potentially oriented in those activities. So we want that to be a much more scrutinized process. So you should have something along that entire spectrum that says, based on risk metrics, whatever those are for you, whether it's data, consumer, path, activity, etc., what type of governance is required based on the risk of that particular activity type. And then wherever possible, include that process in your automation so that you can make it easy to follow and easy to manage. A lot of times governance becomes a document that everybody reads once. It doesn't get updated often, or if it does get updated, those updates are struggling to find their way into existing processes. So any way that you can make that governance an active part of your SDLC process, it will become a lot more effective and utilized. And then the last aspect we look at is oversight, right? So everything you've heard me talk about today is really oriented around self-service and acceleration, trusting teams, measuring risk and letting people move fast, using automation to do things so that people don't have to do it. And the whole idea around that is to remove friction from the system. Most people are not bad actors. They don't want to do bad things. They're good actors and they have the right perspective and they want to do the right things. But what happens is sometimes there is a gap in knowledge where they don't know what they should be doing. So often what we find is that breaches and errors occurring in your governance process are not because of malicious activity. They're typically out of ignorance or a coordination of one or more activities happening between multiple teams and a ball gets dropped. So even if you put completely trusted and perfect processes in place, you still are going to have a need to verify. So trust but verify, automate where you can, put all the processes in place, pre-build, but don't always trust that I told you to do it right, so you did it right. I told you to do it right. I let you do it right. I let you move into production, but we're going to put processes in place that are going to come back and look at those things over time to ensure that things are secure. Now, I'm not recommending that you move highly risky things all the way into production without looking at them. Again, keep in mind, your governance should be risk-oriented. So if something does present an enormous amount of risk, you do want to put the right governance in place and maybe put your oversight into the change management process. But for other things where there's lower risk, you might want to put the oversight after the change management process and let teams move quickly, but verify. So here's some considerations as you start to put these concepts into practice. Don't try to eat the elephant all at once. Trying to implement all of this stuff at once is definitely going to be overwhelming. There are things that you're going to get value out of more quickly than others. Pick one of the concepts or two or three, start to implement them and understand how those are going to provide value, and then build those as you go. In order to understand where you should start, focus on the derived value that you're getting from your channels of engagement. So where does your company derive value from the entire system? Not from your component, but from the entire system. So as we start to build these modern architectures that are more loosely coupled and we look upstream, where do consumers, whether those consumers are partners or vendors or end customers or companies, where are they getting value and how does our company derive value? Where are our gaps and our largest opportunities to create new value? And focus on those areas and then start looking downstream and saying, if I could create one cross-functional team that is going to demonstrate this philosophy, what would they do that would provide the most value to our customers based on what we're trying to achieve today? So take that approach. And then point number three, be agile in your approach, right? Just in time, just enough. So you don't have to do everything. Look at that task that you're trying to accomplish that's going to provide value to your customer and be really agile. Say, well, what is my MVP type approach that will get me some of the value as quickly as I can possibly get it? Not all of the value, but it will get me to the point to where I can reduce my work in progress time and start to realize value faster, and then grow that over time so that I can get to market more quickly and I can start to prove out my ideas, and I also simplify my implementation. So be agile, use just in time, just enough approaches, and measure the value that you're creating. Make sure that you do that because it's going to help you to understand, did I achieve the goal that our company was trying to achieve? And if I did, then I know I did it right. And as I'm building on that, I know I'm headed in the right direction. So that's great feedback for you and your team to know that you're headed down the right road, and also gives you the ability to pivot. The second thing that does for you and your team is it gives you the value to trade on with the organization, to show them what you're doing and the value that it's actually creating, so that when you go back and say, we want to do more of this or we need more funding for this, you've actually got value metrics to show them how this product and project is providing value to the organization. So that's a whole lot of different concepts and ideas, and I hope you have time to go back and either watch again, or we'll be sending the deck out after the presentation for your use. But if there are any questions, I'm going to turn it right back over to Linda now and see if we have time to have a little interactivity.
Okay, so we have the first question here. We have a cab before all of our code promotions. Is that bad?
Well, I think we kind of talked about that a little bit. I think so a cab is like a change approval board, something like that. So if you have an approval board or some kind of a meeting where you're having a gate before you go into production, I think that based on risk, there are times where that makes sense. So if it is P star I type data and the downstream implications of it doing it wrong are really high, then you might need that. And it might be critical to do that because the implications of doing it wrong could cost you, we're putting out an article that's talking about security, and, in the Equifax incident, $1 billion, or other incidents, in the credit card industry, $100 million to tens of millions of dollars. So the implications of rushing through things sometimes are so high that a review board is necessary. However, if they're doing something that is high risk, but they're using pre-built processes completely, then you might look at that and go, oh, well, of course it's high risk, but you're using something that is completely delivered code that's been pre-built and pre-flighted through our security group, so you do not have to go through a board. So there's an option for something that's high risk, but is using pre-built technologies. So now it's secure. And then anything below that, I would say measure the risk. So be aware of what the risks are. Are they using pre-built things? Are they building bespoke things? And if it does break, what's the true business risk that's being created, and measure it from there. But my thinking would be you don't want more than 10 or 15% of your changes going through a physical review board.
Okay, thanks, Lou. The next question we have is, how do you recommend we get started?
Ooh, so yeah, I think I kind of covered that in my wrap up, but yeah, start by picking a project, right? Based on company objectives. So the way that we like to look at it when we talk to our customers is we don't like starting with a technology. Starting with technology, you end up building a lot of things, hoping that you're going to have a problem to solve with them. We like to start with problems that we know we have, that we know we must solve, and when we solve them, we get business value. So when you start looking at the top objectives of the company and the top initiatives in the company, that's a really great place to start looking at where are we going to get the highest value, because it's probably been defined already. Our company's success is going to be based on these activities, and these initiatives represent how we're going to start to realize that. So those have probably been defined. So I would start with those predefined initiatives that are going to that are prioritized as the place that the company is going to invest to get the highest value, and then start building these principles behind those. Where are the areas in those initiatives where you think you do have some of those common problems with back-end systems that need to be evolved more quickly, where you can start to build modern architecture and lift those things out of the back-end system to create autonomy and evolve them more quickly? And that's where you would start with, let's build a cross-functional team there, and let's start to build processes that are governed, and let's start to implement our DevOps processes with a little DevOps automation, and then start baby stepping into some of the other concepts that we've talked about.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lou. That was the last question submitted. So I'll let you wrap things up.
Yeah. So thank you very much for your time today. I hope that at least the ideas and the concepts were things that were presented in a way that you had not heard them before, or if they are, that we've knitted them together in a way that helps you understand how to create more efficiency to move faster and creating a secure environment while you're doing that. If you would like to reach out to me, here's some of my contact information that'll be in the deck that we share with you later. Otherwise, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day.
And I would also like to thank everyone for their time in joining us today. And I hope that you found value in the presentation. And as Lou mentioned, you will get an email with a link to the recording. It'll probably go out tomorrow. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you.